How's it going, everybody? My name is Ron Sparkman, and I am the Chief Curiosity Correspondent for the Space Foundation Discovery Center. And before we get to our amazing guest today, we just want to remind everyone that earlier this month, we announced the launch of our Center for Innovation and Education. The Center for Innovation and Education creates and delivers inclusive, innovative, and sustainable workforce development and economic opportunity programs that enable all people to actively participate in the space economy. Through public and private partnerships, the center engages students, young leaders, entrepreneurs, and professionals. We encourage you to learn more about the new Center for Innovation and Education and how you can make an impact at www.spacefoundation.com/CIE. And with that said, we have an incredible guest today. We have the one and only Cristina Olvera, and she's a TV host, science communicator, and she is also a correspondent for NASA en Español. So, Anna, we are so happy to have you on the show today.
I'm so happy to be here, Ron. Thank you very much for having me. Ron.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead. No, see, you were doing the hand thing, and that's when it's always.
You say your name in Spanish, Ron Sparkman. Thank you.
It sounds so much better that way. So, Anna, let's start off with how you fell in love with space and science.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Actually, I'm sorry about the dogs. You know, everyone is at home, so.
Yep, you got the puppies. It's fine.
Things happen. They're not even mine. They're my neighbor. So yeah. So that's a very interesting question. I got into journalism since I was a very small child because my mother is a journalist too. So journalism and TV broadcasting and everything that has to do with communications were just like the air that I was breathing from the day that I was born. So I was doing that with her and by myself in different projects. But then when I was around 18 or 19 years old, maybe 20, I was working in a TV network, and they offered to give me a show for myself, to host myself. Of course, it had to do with news, but they told me, you need to make a proposal. What are you going to make? What are you going to feature differently from other news shows? So at the time, maybe all of you remember that we were having this huge boom of social media, Twitter, Facebook, everyone was getting on these social media movements, but traditional media outlets were not really paying attention to what was happening there, to the opinion leaders that were emerging from those platforms. So my proposal, my idea was to cover the news agenda, the one that every newscast has to cover in some way or another, but from the perspective of social media platforms. So in that way, I got into technology and all of these other topics that normally get around in social media that are not the same that in normal news outlets. So I was that way featuring news, but at the same time I was getting involved with a lot of internet culture and global subjects that were really emerging in social media and on the internet. So that's how I initially got into technology first, and then I got into science in that same way. So there was one point in which half of the show, it was just 15 minutes, but half of the show was dedicated to the news agenda, and the other half was dedicated to talk about new tools, new topics that were emerging inside the technology and science world. So that's how I really got into it. And then I realized that there was not enough information about these things because things were changing really, really rapidly. Like one day we were using maps, and I mean like a real map, a paper map to get around. To get around the city, and the other month we were all using Google Maps or something like that, like an app or something. So our social interactions were changing from one month to another, and we were not really realizing what this meant for for us as humanity, what does this mean for us? How is humanity evolving, changing all its social interactions? And we can have as a very good example what's happening now. Like our social interactions have evolved and have changed so drastically and dramatically by technology and science that we really need to stop and think what this means for us as a species. So, as you know, I studied philosophy, so that's the philosophical questions are always pressing inside my head. So I wanted people to stop a little bit and reflect a little bit about what was happening with all the science and technology that was changing our way of living. So that's what I devoted my show to. And then it was really liked by the audience, so they gave me half an hour and they put me on prime time. So I was there like for around 3 years, and yeah, most of the show was about science and technology. So that was the way I got into it. And then, well, some other big news channels and radio stations and started seeing this work and started inviting me. So I had a little bit more spaces to talk about it. So that's how I got into science and technology, to say it like very quickly. And if you want to know how I got into space, well, that was a little bit after.
Mm-hmm.
I was I went to study a master's in London, and there I continued to do my daily shows on science and technology, and also cover some topics, some political and things like that. And of course, I talked about space, but it was not one of my main topics. It was just another topic, like any other technology or science topic that I would talk about in my different spaces in the media. But then a friend of mine told me, "Oh, I know what you're doing when you're coming back to Mexico." And I was like, actually, I was not planning to come back like that soon. And he was like, "No, no, no, come back, because there is a position open at the Mexican Space Agency as the director of press and public affairs." And I was like, okay, that sounds a little bit too much for me, but sounds interesting. And he said, yeah, you have all the qualifications. You have to send me your details, all your documents and stuff, and we'll start with the process and we'll see what happens. So I sent him all my documents and all the things that I needed to show for this position. And then I forgot about it, because it was like a month of the process, because it was like a really big thing. You know, the Mexican Space Agency has this organism that makes the decisions, like all the hirings for these big positions, and people of like 15 ministries participate in this decision. So I was like,
wow,
come on, I'm not gonna be selected for this big position. But then one day, when I had completely forgot about it, my friend called me and said, "Well, you are the new director of press and public affairs of the Mexican Space Agency." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Yes, you have to come back."
That's got to be a pretty cool thing to hear, right? Like, oh, I just forgot about it, and now all of a sudden you get to run this whole area.
Yeah, and I was like, what? I mean, I was really shocked, because I had to be in Mexico like in a week or something like that, and I was not prepared at all. I was just moving from a place to another, and it was really, really shocking. So I said, there was a chance that I could only be there for around 3 months, because there was the process where they elect a new director, and normally the directors come with a new team for all these positions. So if he was not re-elected, probably I would not stay in the position longer than 3 months. So I was like, maybe I should not go back only for 3 months. And I was like thinking, and then I said, just the flight from London to Mexico is going to be more expensive than my salary of those 3 months. That maybe it's not gonna be worth it. So I tried to look for a flight, and I found a really cheap flight that would get me to Mexico the day before I needed to show up. So I think that was destiny. And after that, the director got reelected, so I got to stay.
Well, that's awesome. And so a lot of people may not know that there is a Mexican space agency. So it's something that we don't hear about as much here because obviously in the U.S. We have NASA here. So can you tell us a little bit about what the Mexican Space Agency does and what a little bit of what your job entailed?
Yeah. Well, the Mexican Space Agency is a fairly new organism within the Mexican government. It's around 10 years old by now. Actually, Mexico started with some good efforts, some good space efforts from the beginning of the space race. They were developing rockets in a state called San Luis Potosí. But then, the government just, they thought that these efforts were not like a priority for Mexico. So they stopped doing this. They created first a commission for aerospace activities, but then they dissolved it. They didn't really find it necessary. So that stopped, and a lot of years passed until around 2010. Obviously, through all this time, many people, many organizations, universities, and institutes, investigation institutes were pressing and were doing space projects, but everything was like all around the place. So there were a group of people that were all the time asking for a Mexican Space Agency to be created. So it was around 2010 that this really got through, and they finally created the Mexican Space Agency. And then there was a few years more for it to get funding because, okay, there was a law that created the Mexican Space Agency, but it was just like a paper thing. And little by little, they started giving it funding, and they started giving it more responsibilities. So it has been building from there, but budgets are really, really, really tight. So what the Mexican Space Agency does is try to look for all the space efforts around the country and give them their backup and organize them. And for example, there's a special branch that dedicates to education. So they go to universities and talk to them about the importance of opening new careers related to space engineering, and things like that. And they have made a lot of progress in that sense. And also they organize different outreach activities for space to be known within the Mexican population, because these topics are very unknown in these countries, because people are just thinking about other things and they don't think space is something they can reach, which is a completely wrong idea that we have to change. There's another branch of the Mexican Space Agency that dedicates to do the same, but with the industry. They have to go to the different industry fields and convince them that space is another way to go, and how they can invest and how they can develop business models in this sense and in this field of space. There's another branch that dedicates to space law and all the international agreements. By now, the Mexican Space Agency must have around 18 to 20 different agreements with space agencies and other space organisms around the world. And there's another branch that dedicates to investigation. So they try to do the same, go with investigators and researchers to try to encourage them to go into space fields. So it's a really it's a great effort because they have a very, very, very small budget, but it has been productive. I think more and more Mexico is realizing that we have opportunities in space. So it's going little by little. I hope one day the decision makers really realize that investing in these kind of things can really solve some of the most pressing problems of Mexico and developing countries. For example, if we could invest in the fabrication of our own satellites, our own observation satellites, it would really solve a lot of problems that are very pressing problems, like hunger or like natural disasters or things like that. But I think mentality is changing little by little. Right now, there's a very big young community, some of them which that we are all pressing for this to happen. So I think it'll happen soon. And while I was there, it was really exciting because I got to create the Mexican space communication, how and what we were going to communicate about space and about what Mexico was doing in space. And also I got to be there when we were the hosts of the International Astronautical Congress. So that was such an experience because there was so few of us, and we had to organize this huge event that you of course know. And it was so much work. We really, really worked our asses off, but I think it worked really well. And I enjoyed it a lot. I suffered it a lot, but I enjoyed it so much. So I think that was one of my greatest experiences at the Mexican Space Agency. And also the agreement that I got to do with NASA that led me to work with them until now.
I mean, it's an incredible story, and I'm so glad to actually be able to talk about it because it's something that I don't really know a whole lot about. So it's always nice to hear new things and hear the incredible things as we have these emerging space countries that are out there, and it's exciting to hear everything that everyone there is working on. And so there's something I want to touch on real quick because it's interesting, especially nowadays, to be involved in the news and to choose to be the person that that communicates these things is very important. And it's a sometimes unforgiving job, and I know that. So, of all the things, what made you decide to be a newscaster and report on this and be a journalist and share all the news with the world every day?
Well, I think there's a very pressing and like this feeling that you need to communicate things and you need to investigate things and to tell people things. For me, it's a little bit mixed feelings because I think I'm part journalist and part science communicator. So sometimes I just want to communicate, and journalists and to get the message out there and to show the good things that are happening in science and to educate somehow. But in journalism, you also have to look at the bad side of things and be incisive and try to uncover all the things that are going wrong with a project or with some kind of person or things like that. So it's a combination between wanting to get the truth out, some truth that somebody doesn't want to be out. That's the
challenge.
That's the root of a journalist, but also is the necessity of communicating and getting things out and getting the message to spread as much as it can spread.
And so you, with doing the show, you decided that, again, sharing space was a big part of that. Was that something that you had to fight for? Was that something that they were excited that you wanted to do? Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about? Because I know it's something that you want to do on every show. You love talking about all the new space advancements all around the world, and I love that. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how it kind of came to be?
Yeah, well, when I started working at the Mexican Space Agency, I discovered this whole world that was much bigger than I thought. And I was like, oh my God, people need to know about this. I mean, not even me, that I am a science communicator and a journalist and I deal with these topics every day, knew about all this stuff. There's so many things going on in space that nobody knows. And I also, with my other side, the other side of my brain, my philosopher brain, I was like, things that we're doing in space, outside of Earth, they are really meaningful for what it for what it means to be human. It's going to change all of what we're doing in space. Is going to change the meaning of of us as a species. So we need to know, people need to know that these things are happening, and they need to have an opinion about it, and they need to be able to participate. And I was like, I got this urge of really getting these things out and talking to people about it. So I really got passionate about it. Like, I couldn't believe all these things were happening, and we didn't know. And it's not that anyone is hiding them from us, but there's not enough outlets for this information to be spread to people. And also it inspires us to be our best selves. So that's how I really got into this passion that is communicating about space. And I decided that I was going to get these topics through no matter what happened. So I'm so passionate about them, and they are so interesting, and they are so meaningful in so many levels, like the science level, the technological level, the ontological level, the epistemological level, the ethics level, in so many levels that I think they grab people. And that's, like, I think my passion and the meaningfulness of these topics, they just grab people. So that's how I've been able to grab the attention of so many media outlets and so many people that have given me the opportunity to talk about these topics, even in places where they were like really not interested and not thinking about it. For example, I was collaborating for about a year and a half with this Hispanic um, news I don't know how to say it, news channel. Like there's
Nailed it.
there's like Telemundo, Univision, maybe you've heard of them.
Mhm.
And there's this other one that's called Estrella TV, that's like the third one. And of course, they're not talking about space. I mean, they're just talking about some other things that are of the interest of Hispanics in the US. But then I got to show them my work and to show them some topics. And at some point, I was participating 2 days a week with topics about space in a news show. So that was really amazing. And these shows, they just go for the money. So if they have high ratings,
Mhm.
they ask you to come in. If they don't, they don't. So that really showed me that people really want to know about these topics, and we've been just neglecting them because we think they're not smart enough, or that these topics are not for people that dedicate a certain kind of things. But they are so human, because going outside of Earth and taking what we are to other places in the universe is so human and so interesting, and we should all know about it. So I think that's how I've been able to have the chance to share this information with more and more people.
And so you mentioned that some people started paying attention, and one of those ended up being NASA. So you ended up working with NASA in Espanol, and you're one of the correspondents for their show. So we can tell everybody a little bit about that and kind of how you got involved and what it is that you do for that YouTube channel.
Yeah. So that started when I was working at the Mexican Space Agency. It was actually an initiative, in every NASA center, there's many groups and organizations. They organize themselves, to do activities and stuff. So there's a Hispanic group at the Johnson Space Center, and I think there's one of these groups in every NASA center. So they had this idea because before Espacio a Tierra, that's the show that I do at with NASA, there was very few communications in Spanish. They only made it voluntarily. The Hispanics that work at NASA did it voluntarily for some of their projects because they wanted to show more to people who spoke Spanish, or maybe because they had a collaboration with Spain or with some other country. So they did a few things in Spanish, but there was no strategy or no really direction whatsoever in having communications in Spanish. So there was this Hispanic group at the Johnson Space Center that they came to Mexico City for a science fair that we organize here, the biggest science fair. And they had this idea of translating Space to Ground, that is one of the outreach products that they do at the Johnson Space Center, to Spanish. So they've been talking to some private television network for them to produce these shows, these small capsules in Spanish. But they contacted the Mexican Space Agency so we could somehow coach them on how to do this and how to get through with this idea. So I was a director of press and public affairs at that moment. I was just arriving almost. So I went there and I spoke to them and I understood their idea. And I was still collaborating with the TV network of the education ministry. I was doing my science collaborations every day. So I was at 6 a.m. at the news show doing my science collaboration, and then I went to the Mexican Space Agency to spend the rest of my day there. So I thought that there was this show that was just about to start to go on air, and it was going to be broadcasted to all of Latin America and all of Spain and Portugal too. We call this Latin America, Spain, and Portugal. We call it Iberoamerica, like Latin America and the Iberian Peninsula. So that's how we call this like group of countries that we have so many things in common. So this show especially was going to be broadcasted to all of these countries, 22 countries. And they invited me to participate, and they told me to say what was my participation going to be about. So as I was talking to this young engineers in this Hispanic group at Johnson Space Center, and their idea of bringing this information about NASA to the Spanish-speaking community, well, I decided I was going to propose everyone to use my space, the space that they were giving me at this show, to translate Space to Ground into Spanish and to broadcast it to all of those 22 countries in Latin America and Europe. So I told them if this idea made any sense to them, and so they really liked the idea. I went and talked to my boss at the educational TV network, told him that NASA wanted to do something consistent in Spanish and to broadcast it to all of Latin America, and that we could do this, with them, and he was also okay with the idea. So that's how we started to do Espacio a Tierra, which is the translation of Space to Ground, which is a show that gives you the latest of what's happening on board the International Space Station. So we took like 1 year of, negotiations, lawyers and papers and things like that. And then after around a year, something like that, we finally got to sign a Space Act agreement between the Mexican Space Agency, the Educational Television Network, and NASA. And that's how Espacio a Tierra was born, as an official product in Spanish of NASA and of these other two institutions. So that's how we started with this project, and we've been doing it since then. And it's been like 3 years now. And since then, NASA got a lot more interested in communications in Spanish. They only had a Twitter account and one page that was called ciencia.nasa. And now they've got Facebook, they've got Instagram, they've got YouTube, and they've got people that are being paid exclusively to work in communications in Spanish. So that for me is really amazing, because we really got them to get some interest in all of these people that are like 500 million in the world that are speaking Spanish, and that they did not have access, like an official access to this information that NASA is releasing.
And I mean, that's really a perfect segue into my next question, which is working as a science communicator and being able to get this out to a broader audience, especially to the Latin community. I know that's going to be very important to you and the other science communicators that are doing the awesome work that you're doing. So, what does that mean to you to be able to do this work and bring it to a new audience and see people get excited about it?
For me, that's the most important part. When I see faces of people when they are discovering, this sense you get when you discover something, and you get this like intellectual rush, like, oh my God, I really didn't know that, and now I know it, and it gives you power of what can you do with all this knowledge. When I see that in the faces of people, that's what really motivates me. And I've seen this so many times, because it's very sad, but here in Mexico and in Latin American countries, people really don't know about many things that are happening in science and in technology. So when you show them the possibilities, and you literally see their mind opening, and that's what makes you really want to keep on doing it, because it's not easy. There's many doors that close. There's many people that do not believe. There's many things that you have to overcome. For example, for me, it's always the thing that I'm not a scientist. So sometimes scientists, they are not really supportive of what you do, and you have to convince them, and it's a very harsh job to do, to gain respect and to show them that you're serious with what you're doing. And also, well, there's times when some media outlets, they're not interested in sharing this information, because they think it's not important, because it's more important the political information, the economical information. So there's many obstacles that you have to overcome, and every time you want to step back and say, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore, then you see some other person, some other child that didn't know about Curiosity, or didn't know about Voyager, or didn't know about, I don't know, whatever space endeavor that you can think of, and you literally see their faces glowing up, and and realizing that they have an opportunity to overcome all obstacles and go even into the stars. And that's when you say, okay, I'm gonna keep on doing this.
So for the people that have been listening today that you, I'm sure, have inspired, is there any words of wisdom, any advice that you want to give them if they want to follow in your footsteps and be a science communicator, get into the news and share, share space and science with a broader audience?
Well, I think this is advice that everyone gives you, and I think, Ron, you're a very good example of it. The first thing you need to do is find your passion. Don't do it because of others. Don't do it because of your family. Don't do it. I mean, there's many reasons to do things, but when you feel a spark in your heart, that means that that's your passion. So that's the first thing that you have to do. That it's not an easy thing to do. Sometimes it comes at 30, at 20, at 40, at 60. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what age you get to find it. But the first thing is to find your passion. If you haven't, keep on looking. It's never late. And then try to pursue it, because the fire that ignites within you with your passion is going to lead you to be happy, which is the most important thing. It doesn't matter if you don't get to be Elon Musk, but you're gonna be happy, and that's the most important thing. And if you're happy, you're gonna inspire happiness in others and inspire others to find their passion. That's the advice that I would give them.
I love it. It's perfect. What they say, and this is an old one and it's cliche, but that's one of the reasons I think that it means so much is that they say, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. So if you get to wake up every day and do the thing that you love, it's exciting to be excited to get out of bed and go do and be a part of the thing that you love so much. So if you want to follow your journey and see what you're up to, can you let them know where they can find you on social media and let anybody know if there's anything cool that you got coming up soon?
Yeah, of course. So, you can follow NASA en Español in Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, where you can see Espacio Tierra every week. You can follow me, on Twitter, Ana_Olvera. You can follow me on Facebook, Ana Cristina Olvera. Instagram, Ana_Cristina. And you can also follow Noticiero Científico y Cultural Iberoamericano, which is a scientific show that I host and that I'm a correspondent for it too. I do really cool pieces on space stuff, so go there as well. Televisión Educativa, you can also follow me there. And Cuarta Revolución is my project on Facebook. You can write it with a 4TA, Revolución, like revolution, but with a C. So that's where I'm constantly sharing space news. So we can meet up there.
And it was so awesome to have you on today and talk about so many things. Every time we talk, I always learn something new. So thank you so much for joining us on Space4U Live today. It was incredible to have you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ron. Thank you for having me.
And that is going to conclude this episode of the live edition of Space Foundation's Space4U podcast. And don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast and leave a review on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, and on Google Play. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, our website, www.spacefoundation.org, where you can also learn about the various ways you can support the Space Foundation. And don't forget to also visit www.discoverspace.org for more digital content for teachers, parents, and students. You can support the Space Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, by visiting www.spacefoundation.org/donate. And on all these outlets and more, it's our goal to inspire, educate, connect, and advocate for the space community, because at the Space Foundation, we will always have space for you. So thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode on Thursday.
Hey, bye.